Can I put the PowerPoint up now?
Okay, Hello and welcome to the Council Land and Shore Committee for Thursday, March 7th. I am Victoria Hunt. I will be the chair, and I'm joined by Council Member Stacy Goodman and Council President Tola Martz. And this evening we have two items on the agenda. They're both items where action will be needed. The first item is AB 7682, Proposed Amendments 2018 Comprehensive Plan, Central Issaquah Plan, IMC, and Central Standards. And the second item is AB 7683, Amendments to IMC 18.07.480, Community Facilities Standards regarding public buildings. And with that, we will see a presentation from Trish Heinonen, Policy Planning Manager.
Thank you. First off, I wanted to highlight the changes that you all asked us to make last month, and they're on page 87 of 132 in your packet. I'm saying that in case you don't have it tabbed exactly where that is. We removed all the personal pronouns throughout the whole document. We didn't write those down just because there were several. We put shalls in land use policy A7, and we changed shoulds to shalls in land use policy G3 on the school district and compact schools, and G4. Slow me down if we didn't get something right. Also on page 88, we put the compact schools to shall and the design shall. And we also simplified land use policy H5 to be a lot more simple about the TDR development rights as requested. This part, number 5, is actually pulled out of the ordinance as that's where the definitions were landed. And we changed the definition of compact schools to not say located outside of central Issaquah, to clarify, to not make it chase its tail on that. So those are changed. And then the parks, we clarified the green necklace vision on what it referred to. On page 89 of your packet was the last change you asked for to clarify the 20-year park strategic plan and what it included. And that's all that I have as far as the specific changes that you requested, and so we're open to whatever other changes or thoughts or ideas that you have on the 2018 comp plan amendments.
Thank you. Do we have any questions or thoughts? Councilmember Goodman.
Can you go back to the first page of the shalls, please? Okay, the first shall, this shall be done. So let's start at the beginning. The land use element A7, whatever the policy is, it says, well, this is the policy. Respect the topographic character of each site, including hillsides, by making as small a change in the environment as necessary and practical with the intentions of conforming to the natural topography and maintaining slope stability. This shall be done through building design and siting, minimizing the height of retaining walls, and limiting alteration to native grade. So my question is, it seems to me that there's possibly room for interpretation about whether it shall be done, how it shall be done is limited to building design, siting, and minimizing the height of retaining walls. That maybe there are other ways to respect the topographic character. And so let's say we have something that we're reviewing, a plan that we're reviewing, and you say, and none of those applies, but you could achieve it in another way. Is there an argument to be made that they don't have, the applicant wouldn't have to do anything else? But this is the comp plan policy, right?
Right, and we've taken the language from
Okay, never mind.
from the Central Plan Architectural Urban Design Manual, so that would lead it back to the actual code reference and description of what they'd have to do.
Okay, thanks. Answer my own question.
I love that.
Yeah.
Anything else on the corrections that were made?
I have a few things. So on this first one, land use policy A7, I think it should be existing native vegetation, because if you have an existing site where there's a lot of invasive species, you wouldn't want to retain those. And then on land use policy G4, compact schools shall be designed to allow bus and car access, yet prioritizing buses over cars. It's in the second part. So the first part, I think you did make that change to the definition of compact schools, but I think that to find it. Oh, it's actually, sorry, it's in the section 10 in the definitions of the urban schools. So in the urban schools, it says urban schools are a type of compact schools located only in central Issaquah. They fit on a smaller site than compact schools. So it's again back to that they are a type of compact schools. So I think what it is meant to say is that urban schools fit on a smaller site than most compact schools, or than fit on a smaller site than compact schools that are outside of central Issaquah.
Oh, I see what you're saying, because they could be some of the ones that are urban
Well,
schools.
because you're describing a type of compact schools, and then you say they fit on a smaller site than compact schools, which they are a type of.
How about
so.
then compact schools outside of central Issaquah?
Yeah, or is there
Or
a?
did you have a suggestion?
So my other suggestion was, if I assume that there's more information about what this meant, and I guess that's also a question though, if there is a definition of what it means by they need to be on a smaller site than compact schools outside of central Issaquah. So if there's a definition about how much smaller site they need to fit on, then maybe put that in.
I think at this point, it's more aspirational that because the land is so much more valuable and scarce in the urban area, that by design, we need them to fit on a smaller site than they would if they were outside central. But we don't have actually a 12 acres versus 9 acres sort of definition yet. Because it would depend on the school too, elementary, high school, or whatever. But I see where you're going with trying to clarify what that would mean.
So the problem is, we haven't fully unpacked what code we would be willing to bring forward with the school district. I don't think, right?
You're correct.
So we've gotten as far as the policy, and we know that, a suburban school looks like this, compact school looks like this, and an urban school looks like this. I don't know. I'm also struggling with the fact that we're saying it fits on a smaller site than a compact school, but it doesn't really. I mean, I think the intent is how does it fit on a smaller site, right? There's nothing about, like from the last policy that we talked about, where it talked about, that the buildings and the other things were the ways that we were going to accomplish that previous policy. This one really doesn't say it. It doesn't say how it fits on a smaller site. It just says it fits on a smaller site, and then it blends gracefully with the adjacent neighborhood. And I don't know if maybe rather than focusing on the smaller site, or we could potentially list ways that it's gonna, like for example, I think the only way we're getting to smaller than small, is things like the recreational facilities either are now on the roof or they're on separate parcels and potentially shared with like city parks and other things. I mean, you can only make, the classrooms don't get smaller. We're not saying that if you live in an urban area, your classroom is smaller, but the other kind of accessory things that comprise the school, like parking lots and bus drop-off areas and recreational facilities, those have to be, I think, worked in a more efficient way to get to an even smaller site. And I don't know how much of that needs to be here, but I agree. I'm not, this particular definition is, it's not that insightful, I guess. So I don't know if you want it unpacked any more than that, or if it's fine.
Well, why I bring it up is that compact schools, it has the definition of compact schools is that they're smaller than traditional suburban schools, and then the definition of urban schools is that they're a subset of compact schools that are very small. And so that all seems very open to interpretation. And then also, I think it does need to be clarified, the compact schools outside of Central Issaquah, because it's.
So it sets some expectation for the conversation that we still need to have with the school district. That is, okay, so now we have a policy that says urban schools are on even smaller sites than compact schools. And so we can start to say, okay, so school district, how far are you willing to reduce the footprint to get us to a smaller site? And so I think that's maybe why this isn't wanting to be more defined right now, is because that piece is still yet to be unpacked.
Councilmember Goodman?
And I'm wondering if it's maybe the same issue that I had in the policy that I was talking about first, and that is it's not code, it's the plan, the comprehensive plan. The only thing I can think of that is, rather than say what they are, is say almost why they're urban schools and why they would fit on smaller sites, and that's generally because the land, generally speaking, there's fewer opportunities for larger parcels in Central Issaquah, so traditional schools wouldn't really fit. You don't have large, and you need to say that just in a sentence, but they're smaller footprint schools are needed because of the land availability in Central Issaquah.
So can I ask a stupid question of Trish? So Trish, so this is part of the 2018 docket.
Correct.
And are we thinking we're going to have that code conversation with the school district this calendar year in terms of the code for urban schools?
We were hoping to, and then roll it into the whole overhaul of 18. So
Okay.
it wouldn't have to be done till next year, but we wanted to start the conversation this year. But we wanted the two definitions, because these would actually go in code, the two definitions.
Okay, so
No.
so the timeline for 18 update is to have a draft by the end of the year and then adopt it next year, mid-year.
Right.
So my question, sorry, it took me a while because I don't do anything in 30 seconds, is can we kick the can on the definition for urban school and move it to the 2019 docket? Because by the time we talk about the 2019 docket, we might have had some of those conversations with the school district about the code piece of this, which might actually help the definitional piece of this. And again, I'm not saying that's a good idea, I'm just throwing it out as something to think about, and I don't know.
And the only reason we did try to have definitions for both is when we had the code section for public schools, and we started writing policies for both, we realized we didn't have a definition for both, and yet we had code for one. And so we were going back to have at least the definition for both, so that the code for all of the compact schools would at least have a definition. And so then we put urban in there too, thinking that you needed both. But I can see you could peel off urban even though you've got policies for urban schools.
So,
Confused.
okay, so I have one clarifying question, then I have a comment to the suggestion that was made. The clarifying comment is, this is IMC, so Issaquah Municipal Code definition, so it will be in code.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay. And then the second thing is, I would think that if we have these as placeholders with the wording that is currently somewhat vague, that is still giving direction for where we want to go, and then they can be refined in the future update. So that would be my preference. I don't see a drawback unless there's one that I'm not aware of. Councilmember Martz.
Yeah, I just want to ask, I mean, I was sort of trying to think a practical case where like somebody could get confused and build an urban school when they meant a compact school, or build a compact school when they meant an urban school? Like, do we have are urban schools compact schools that are inside Central Issaquah? So
Correct.
you're not going to have a compact school inside Central Issaquah, and you're not going to have an urban school, you know what I mean? Like, everybody understands, if I build a school here, I know which one of these I can build, right, by these
Right.
definitions.
Right, and I think we were just trying to, when we talked to the school district, I think we were trying to make a distinction of the ones that are coming forward now from the bond will be more compact, but we have expectations that the next round of bond schools are gonna be urban.
I mean, to me, as long as everybody as long as the definitions are deterministic so that people understand what applies to them, then I'm willing to live with ambiguity. If I thought somebody could come in and use a vague definition to build something that wasn't the right thing at the right place, then I'd be more concerned.
Right.
But that doesn't sound like the case right here.
Correct, you're correct.
Councilmember Goodman?
So, this is about approving the docket of completed items? This agenda bill?
Yes. Of all
So,
the
how do
content amendments.
we, explain to me procedurally how we adopt new code as part of the comp plan?
When we had urban schools and compact schools as a policy question in the docket of amendments, comp plan amendments, we recognized that there weren't definitions, and we didn't do that in the one that's coming next to you.
Okay.
And so we added that as part of the policy discussion, is that we needed to define them in the code. So there are times when we do comp plan amendments that code pieces
Get
arise
revised.
that are needed for the policy
Okay.
to work together.
Okay, thanks.
So that's why these are embedded in the ordinance, as Vicki mentioned, that they're not like a separate attachment like the other
Right.
amendments.
Okay, thanks, Trish.
So it was the resolution that we're keeping the two definitions, and we're gonna clarify they're on a smaller site than compact schools outside of Central Issaquah? Is that a working fix?
Yes, I mean, that addresses my first
Okay.
concern. Okay, do we have any other thoughts on this, or questions? Comments?
Not on this bill.
Okay. So then if there's no other discussion, I will move the administration's recommendation. So I move to recommend to the full council adopting the amendments to the comprehensive plan, the Central Issaquah Plan, the Issaquah Municipal Code, and the Central Issaquah Development and Design Standards.
I have a question before we vote.
Okay.
You had suggested changing existing vegetation to existing native vegetation, but then the rest of the sentence says shall be retained consistent with the city's tree retention requirements. So it's really the tree retention requirements that are the driving, that are sort of the authorizing thing in that sentence, right? So if in other words, if there isn't a distinction between native vegetation and vegetation in the tree retention requirements, and I have no idea if there is, then the proposed change that you suggested, it wouldn't matter.
Well, I could be reading it wrong, but I thought that it was, should we bring it up? I thought that it was existing vegetation and trees, sort of as, and then in clause about trees and the tree retention code, because I think the tree retention code is about trees, and existing vegetation could be blackberries, which is why I'm making the suggestion.
Yeah.
But we could change, I mean, I think we could also do a punctuation change to make it clear that we're talking about native vegetation, and that if you have invasive vegetation, you can clear that. It's a common issue with
Are blackberries
site
not considered
development, so-
native vegetation?
The
Don't we have
non-
blackberries here?
There is a native
non-native
blackberry, but
blackberries.
Himalayan blackberries are
Are
the
not
ones
native.
that grow everywhere.
Oh, I learned something new.
Yeah.
So I support that amendment. So I think your motion is amended with existing native vegetation, right?
Yes, and maybe also do some punctuation to make it clear that the tree code
Separate.
is governing tree retention.
I just wanted to be clear on that before I said, yes, I support this
Okay.
motion.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, so I think the motion is still on the table, so are we ready to vote? Okay, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed? Motion carries. So that was the administration's recommendation from the packet.
And,
Consent agenda?
Yes, this can be on consent, I think.
thank
They're
you.
getting used to the new day, huh?
And I was informed that Dan Martinez is taking notes.
Oh,
And,
there you go.
and will be texting the mayor's office after the meeting, so that's
Wow.
happening remotely.
Okay.
Great.
You're so great.
Well, thank you for that. Okay, so now we are moving on to AB
That's awesome.
7683, amendments to IMC 18.07.480, community facilities standards regarding public buildings.
This also has changes from February's Land and Shore. And that did not have its own memo, but that was the newly uploaded piece on page 117, I think, of your packet, or I might have the old version. It was
121.
121. Was way in the back. And the major changes that we made, there were some pieces and parts that are highlighted in blue, but these were the major changes that we made. We changed the definition of community space to be a lot more clear. We clarified the FAR reduction request for public buildings and schools, which is footnote 7, to use administrative adjustment of standards, and we added approval criteria for the FAR reduction. And a similar piece for footnote 9 is to, they may increase the bill to line, they may request an increase, also using the administrative adjustment of, I forgot, administrative in there. Adjustment of standards process using the approval criteria that we added as well for footnote 9. So those were the big pieces that you asked for, and we weren't sure how that would turn out, so I wanted to let you sort of ponder if we hit the nail on the head with that one or not so much. Those were the major changes from last February.
Okay, thank you. Do we have any questions? So President Martz.
I think that at the top of page 121, it says it indicates changes proposed at Land and Shore 2419. I think that's 2719. A small detail, but and then
Oh, on the top of this? Oh, yeah.
and
Good
then
eye.
at page 126, which is the end of this, pretty much the end of this memo, on on number 20, additional criteria for build to line increase. An increase, blah, blah, blah. Then it's got sub-items. The increase is necessary to blah, blah, blah. The increase is no greater than blah, blah, blah. The reduction will be equal to blah, blah, blah. I think you meant the increase for C.
You're right. I was copying and pasting from above. Good
Yeah.
eyes.
It's not really going to change the character of the community unless somebody
Right.
misreads it, but I just thought, might as well get the language right.
Well, that's good. That's super. I didn't get that on the last read either. Other things you spotted with your eagle eyes?
That was it.
Okay, I have a few things. So, on the community, on the table, which is on page 124, that has the community facility standards for public schools and public buildings, it has a pervious surface, as well as and then it defines that by saying impervious surface plus pervious surface equals 100%. But there's a max impervious surface, so I just wondered why that's there.
It's a throwback from how Chapter 7 has pervious and impervious, that they add up to 100. I'm told it keeps people from trying to fudge, well, if it doesn't say the other number, then I can change it. You know, I can, so we've always put them both. We may change that when we overhaul, because it seems a little silly to me to have them both in there, because obviously to those of us that work here, it has to add up to 100, because you can't have more than 100%.
Should it say minimum then? It's a minimum of 10.
It could if the other says maximum. Sure, I could, that works for me.
I didn't understand why it had that on there. And then, let's see, so, there, in the packet, there are a number of places where it says, see staff note number 2 in additional information in chart below on page 125, for example. So how is that gonna work in the actual?
It wouldn't be a code, it wouldn't be in the code. It was to respond to, there was a question on, there wasn't an understanding of what the part in the code meant. And so I was referring to what the actual, when it's sending you to the other code part, like the first part is in the central standards under architectural and character. And so it's real specific what you have to do for views and vistas. And so I was just letting you sleep well at night, knowing that the code is already provided, and so we wouldn't have to add that into the schools and public buildings, because it already lives in central. And same with the adjustment of standards process. I was just letting you know where it is in the code now that we were copying, so to speak, for this new process of the FAR and the build-to line. But they wouldn't be in the actual adopted code. It was just a sort of breadcrumbs to show you that they exist somewhere else, and that's where we took them from.
Okay.
Does that help?
Yeah. So thank you for that. The other thing, why is there a maximum floor area ratio for the public buildings?
Maximum. I think what we took this from was the central standards, what most of those urban FARs can be in central, and so we picked that as I think that's most of the minimums that you can do in the urban core. And so we thought that seemed, not sure that we would get that right away, but in trying to be more urban and using our spaces better, that's what we started with, was 2.
But it's a maximum, so you couldn't go more compact and higher.
Is it a maximum on the base, or is it a maximum?
The base got crossed off,
We
so now it
switched
just
out
says
base
maximum.
for maximum because it seemed,
And what's the, I don't have the chart, so sorry, what's the maximum number?
2.
2.
and the minimum is 0.75.
So 2 seems low.
For public buildings and schools? Okay,
Compact
we
public
took that from central, but I'm open to any number that
I mean,
seems
for
better.
example, the middle school that's being designed right now for Talus, that's a 5-story building. And if they had actually put the track on the roof, you know, you could potentially shrink that site to where they might be pushing a 2 FAR. You know,
Okay.
for us, you know, if we thought about us building like a new city hall, throw that out, you know, I could tell you it's a 3-story building, and if we wanted to co-locate an affordable housing project, say, on top of that, you know, it's not beyond expectation that you could have a 7-story building there. And to get to a 2 FAR with a 7-story building, my guess is we're gonna have a problem there. So,
Well, so I think more to my point, I just don't understand why we would put a max, especially a max that's so low when we're trying to encourage more compact and
Right, it's a good
going up.
question.
so President Martz.
So so the weird thing is, I remember asking this very question like 8 years ago. And I remember that I had an answer, and it may have been Mark Hinthorn who gave me the answer. I don't even remember who it was. There was an answer why anybody would, in our situation in the valley, would want max floor area ratios, but I can't remember what it was. And it certainly, in retrospect, doesn't seem compelling. If you have a max building height,
right.
that sort of covers you.
Right. And the two from public schools was from when you first adopted it, 2 years ago? And so we just mimicked that for public buildings, but we're happy to change that now that we've been around the block with new schools.
So the reason, okay, so let's take a step backwards and see if this is rational. So in the rest of Central, we basically have a base height and then a max height. And to get from base to max, you get there through density bonus or TDRs, right? And so if we're getting rid of the base height and we're going, or base FAR, and we're just going to a max FAR, to your point, I mean, you've got limitations on impervious, you've got maximum building height. I don't know. I mean, we have the minimum FAR because our expectation, again, is we're not being wasteful with the land, so it serves a purpose. I think the maximum FAR is regulated by other things in this table. I don't know why we would keep this column.
Councilmember Goodman,
It's a comment, not a question. I don't know how comfortable I would be removing an entire column, kind of with us all kind of going around the table trying to figure out why we crossed out base and what it means, and it makes me a little uncomfortable.
Well, do we know why we crossed out base? I mean, that also seems like a pretty substantial difference to go from it being the base maximum to just being the maximum.
And I think that, again, was from schools. When we looked at what we had adopted for schools, it didn't make sense to have a minimum and a base. Because they seemed so similar that, and yet different. So it seemed one is truly the minimum and one maybe is the maximum.
So do schools currently in the code, do schools have a maximum of 2? Is that what it is, or is it the base?
That's what's adopted now in the code.
Oh. The base was crossed out at what point?
Going through again, because it said that's what was adopted was base and minimum.
Okay, so
And
it
when
was
we
base.
looked-
So
Right,
it's-
and when we looked at it again, the base didn't seem to make sense anymore. Once we
currently
looked at
base.
it again, when the first school came in, we thought, why are they both the low numbers? They're both a low instead of having a max.
So currently in our code for public schools, adopted code, is it base?
Base.
We're
Base is-
proposing to make a change also to max for public schools?
Right.
I don't see why
So
we would do
Trish, okay, so let me ask you a different question. So Trish, is this table different for public schools than it is for, say, private facilities?
Correct.
Okay. Was it,
And that's how we did it 2 years ago when we first had the situation on the Hill that we were trying to have standards for.
okay, so, and I understand, okay, so I understand where the 2 came from in terms of conversations with the school district and their expectation because of their recreational facilities that they would never get to a very high FAR. Okay, now, what we're talking about in terms of urban schools, I think will be a problem because a 2 is not going to feel very urban. So I think there's a problem there. And then for us and our buildings, I mean, for most of our stuff is fairly low density, but if we're talking about some facilities, a 2 FAR seems really restrictive. So,
So President Mertz.
Is it maybe because, did this legacy back to when we were doing the Central Issaquah plan, we wanted people to have to come up with some sort of, bonus to get beyond to? Like it was an effort to try to say, if you want more, you can do it, but we want whoobies?
I don't think for public schools it was.
not
No,
for
but I
public
mean,
schools, but
it
for
might have just
private.
inherited the language
Oh,
from
true.
private.
And
the
I
private
think
side, which
too, the drafts that we have for urban schools, there's a third column for urban schools because they're different than, and that then public will be compact schools outside central. So there'll be three
And what's-
categories.
And what's the third column?
Urban schools.
That's a row.
Oh, I'm sorry, a
Okay.
row. There'll
All
be a
right.
third row.
Okay, all right. I got-
Because you
okay,
were worried that compact schools was gonna have everything in it. It's not, there'll be 2 rows. And less columns, I got rid of the minimum lot width and the, because those didn't make any sense why those carried over, but because they're in chapter 7, they carried over, but
Okay, so,
So are we talking about these additional rows because those will be in a future change, though? Is they're not here?
they're not here. So the urban school code will be a new row added to this table.
Next year?
Or whatever else, or my guess is we're departing from this table, since this table's just in central. And part of what we're doing with the Title 18 update is getting the tables to work citywide and not just in one geography. So that's a whole other conversation. I don't know, I've been in this room a lot this week, but for me, I'm not sure why we have a max FAR, especially for public buildings. And
Well,
let me- and-
I'm also not sure why it went from base to max,
Yes.
right? That's the other thing.
So let me ask Trish, if this comes back in April, is there gonna be a problem? That'll give us time to talk through this and potentially work the table the way we all feel comfortable with it.
sure, no problem.
Okay. All right, I would, depending on how the rest of your conversation goes this evening, I would want to take a little bit more time with this so we don't do something that we can't explain later. That would be unfortunate.
Okay, well, I would be okay with that for this element, so. Okay. My other question was about this, the footnote to get to the administrative standards adjustment. Is that how these are usually done? Or, because I would think that for administrative adjustment of standards, there's a process. But is it usual to put a footnote and say, then go to the process?
If I'm doing the table, that tends to
So
be
that's a
my way
running
of doing
joke
it.
right now, because if you look through our city code, there's so many footnotes, it's super crazy. So, but it's really understandable.
Yes.
I am gonna guess with you, that the version that we're working on with our consultant will have, footnotes will be probably used in a different way. So, I guess don't get wound up on the footnotes. I think it's matching how the rest of the code works.
Okay.
I think we're gonna go to a different place, would be my guess, through this process. Or maybe not.
I'm fine with that. We had a
Last
good
question.
run with footnotes.
That was my last question, so. Okay, so do we have any more questions? Do we have any more comments or thoughts? Okay, so because we aren't ready to take action or make a recommendation on this, I'm going to recommend that this return back to Land and Shore for another touch.
So Trish, does the agenda bill right now allow it to come back in April, or does it have to go back to council and then get referred back to committee?
I believe last time it went back to council to come back, and then I think it says to come back this next time. Do you know if you have to go back to have it referred back?
Yes.
We do, yeah.
You do.
Just had a,
So your
Refresher
update,
on that.
so it goes back to council to be referred back to Land and Shore in April.
okay, so I can make a motion just to formalize it too. So I would recommend that this return back to Land and Shore at the next Land and Shore meeting. Via the consent agenda. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed?
Excellent. And when is that, April 11th? No, April
First.
April 4th.
Oh.
4th. No, your wireless comes back April 1st, which I thought was telling. Excellent.
Okay, great. That is our second item, 2 items. So there being no further business, this meeting is, the next meeting of the Land and Shore Committee will be April 4th, 2019. And with that, the meeting is adjourned at 7:11 p.m.